What's the title of this course? I didn't give the title. It was
Hesitating Thought.
yeah, Hesitating Thought. Here it is, it's on page 73. What we have said so far is a little uncertain, discontinuous, somewhat meticulous. But in the pejorative meaning of the term, a little obsessive also. And I have the same feeling you do. I think it comes from the fact that I am myself hesitant. To simplify, I hesitate between two positions, while still hoping that my hesitation is vain and that these are not two positions. To put it quickly, between a pagan position in the sense of the sophists and a position that is, let us say, Kantian. I see quite well where their proximity lies. It is in the fact that there is no reason of history. History is not rational. The second thing is, and this is Lyotard, human beings do not make history, contrary to what Marx says in the 18th century. What he says is human beings make history, but not as they,
not under conditions of their own choosing.
Yeah, exactly. And he proves that over and over again. So that's a split statement. But people don't see it as, some Marxists don't see it as human beings make history. Okay. Look what I'm saying. I'm trying not to use the word fuck in here. No reason in history. I mean that no one can place himself or herself in the position of an utterer on the course of things, and therefore there is no court in which one can adjudicate the reason of history. This is a Kantian position, etc. So, and then he talks about sophists and so on. Also on page 82. Here he's talking about two ways of deciding outside of rational criteria. So, and he says he hesitates to decide when he is dealing with opinions that are exactly contrary to each other, especially if, as happens with Kant's antinomic theses, both are perfectly demonstrable. Okay, yeah, Kant is able to survive as a thinker by creating antinomies. Which is an interesting word, antinomous. What does the word nomos mean? Law, custom, it's how we do it in this village, that kind of thing. As opposed to physis, which is nature, which is, being itself, logos in a fixed sense. It's negation itself. So those are usually played off of each other. What an anthropologist attempts to do is to try to find a universal of some kind or another. In terms of physis, and to be able to judge cultures. And there was the attempt to find the universal of what in anthropology? Incest is a taboo. So the works that we're talking about in terms of Aristotle are not from the Argonon. They are from the Nicomachean Ethics, the Rhetoric, the Politics, and so on. And for Kant, we get to the third. Okay. The Critique of Judgment, or the beautiful, with what happens as it gets into that book. The Critique of Pure Reason is the first, Critique of Practical Reason. The truth, the good, the beautiful. Okay, this is the trio that they're all pretty much working with in Plato. Okay. The good, the true, the beautiful. And so he wants to talk about the beautiful, but what does he discover? What undoes everything? The sublime. which brings in the whole notion of pleasure and pain. Masochism, sadism, and so on. And one of the things that Deleuze, Deleuze has a book on Kant, but you don't read any of Deleuze's books, I want to know about Kant, because you're not going to get, what people would normally write about Kant. But basically what he is saying is that when Kant gets to the third, something happens at the level of threes, third figures, or fourth figures. Derrida talks about fourth figures as well. Is that Kant creates this pure reason. It's not the way that, we would like it to be, like Plato wanted it. And then we have the everyday reason, the practical reason. And then he got to the third, and he was trying, and what is beauty? It's generally seen as balance. The idea of beauty is symmetry, balance, and so on. What's the difference between a beautiful person and an attractive person? There's a difference. An attractive person doesn't not necessarily look beautiful. There's something that you don't know what it is that you're attracted to at the level of desire, need and desire. Well, what happens basically, and I'm using this metaphor, is that when Kant gets to the third, Deleuze says the septic tank begins to back up into the house. That's the excluded third. Okay. You get the shit out of the house. It's a struggle. It's a struggle against our bodies. Okay. And the poop that we have. So anyway, it's these works that are being dealt with. And if you look, once you get into the 19th and 20th century, these are the issues that really people begin. What is it that? And I wanted to say is that this is incredibly funny once you get into the book. Lyotard has to rewrite the ethical, the Nicomachean ethics. He has to rewrite it in the libidinal economy. And it's called, well, there's a section in it. The Nicomachean Erotics. Libidinal economy is a devastating book, if you believe in critique, because there's no such thing as critique anymore. All of that stuff is just stupid. It does not work. Let me give you an anecdote quickly. I don't want to keep you over time, so we have another 12 minutes, so I'll give you the same. What is critique all about? You want to discover, from a Marxist critical point of view, you want to discover what you're doing that is wrong, okay? So what you do is you look for contradictions in your behavior. For example, you offer a course on critique, and you study GAP, the entire company, and you try to discover, and you're working from some sense of fairness, and sense of reciprocity, hospitality, goodness, and so on, right? And then you discover something that's not those things, that people are being exploited, and that the t-shirts are being sold for, 20 times that they ended up paying these people, okay, to make these t-shirts. And you see that, and you feel the rage of it. I didn't know that, and I'm glad I know that. This is what Marx is talking about in Capital One. They do it and don't know they do it. So we're going to teach you that you're doing this thing, and once you know that you're doing it, you'll stop. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. It does not, you do not stop. So the kid comes to school. I'm giving you a real story. A friend of mine told me. This kid finally, after they studied the gap, he walks in, and he's got his gap sweater on, thinking nothing about it. And this friend of mine, the teacher, said, takes him outside. Says, what is this? What is this? What are you doing? And the kid says, I just like Gap, man. After we went through this whole thing about Gap, you telling me you should have burned it, or you should have given it away to somebody. No, you can't give this filth away to somebody else. You should have destroyed it, wiped your ass with it, or something like that. But the kid couldn't get rid of it. Why? Reason, thinking along the lines of rationality, does not free anybody. Why? The guess is there are libidinal attachments that we have, for the lack of a better, this doesn't mean sex all the time. It is libidinal attachments that we have. A desire for this object. Have you ever gone and bought? I mean, people, advertisers, know all about this, right? They create this desire for something. You go buy it and you save money, and you finally find it, and you get a good price, and you buy it, and you bring it home, and it sits there. Why did I buy this thing? So you go through this confessional mode. Why did I buy it? What did I get out of this? I really wanted it when I didn't have it, and now I've got it, and I don't want it. What's that all about? We need to know what that's about. Because political economies don't tell us enough. They're far too philosophical. Okay? And Marx was what? He wasn't that interested in what? Psychology. Psychoanalysis. He called it what? A bourgeois something or other. What else do we need to know besides these two economies? Is there a third one? Is it going to wipe us out? So basically what Lyotard is doing is studying people who Kant is relatively okay, but he ends up saying Kant is, well, he's like a sophist. And even calls Aristotle, he's like a sophist. And is called, Lyotard generally refers to himself as sophist. There's this wonderful story about your in print. I'm going to sit down and back in front of the camera. It's in The Logics of the World. Have you read that book, Badius? It's after, the major book. And he's taking on Leibniz's notion of many different logics, many different worlds. But, he subtracts one, starts with two. And then there are all these situations. By the way, you're going to find in this book, if you haven't already, a phrase, prescriptive situation. It's worth pursuing. It is when you find yourself in the most strange situation. And he is thinking in terms of Levinas here. A prescriptive situation instead of a rhetorical situation. So anyway, to get back to Badiou, he has at the end of this book, he's got this little section there at the very end of the book with all these stories and anecdotes. Let me tell you about Lyotard. My God, let me tell you about Lyotard. We were in a car together once, and a storm hit, and it was raining, and it was raining, and it was raining, and we were trying to talk philosophy, and it was hell. It was like being at Troy. He was killing me, I was killing him, and he goes on and on about this, And then he mentions, and then he talks about a goblin, the book on St. Paul. But he mentions all these other philosophers. He's telling these little anecdotes. They're priceless, okay? Have you read the book that he wrote on Deleuze? The whole introduction is about stalking Deleuze so that Deleuze will pay attention to him. It's like one of us stalking somebody, Know that I'm here, talk to me, that kind of thing. But stalking all the way through. The introduction is about 20 pages, all the different places, these encounters. And finally Deleuze says, okay, we'll talk. And then he writes the book and, and finds everything not okay with Deleuze's thinking. Well, now to get to the point I wanted to get to through this labyrinth. Badiou calls Lyotard a sophist, a neo-sophist. In his first book on manifestos of philosophy, Badiou's manifesto, the second one out now, or about to come out. It's interesting because he's working within the genre of the manifesto. You can just say what you want to say. You don't have to put, you know, you can throw out things that look like propositions, statements of some kind, and you don't have to argue for them. Okay, it's remarkable. But there's a community. There's this community between Badiou and Giorgio Agamben and Lyotard and so on. Okay? But it's a struggle, and he defines it as a struggle. It doesn't mean he doesn't like them. You know, I mean, he likes them a lot. Okay, and they create this community. There's weather there. It's not entropy. Okay, there are differences. Okay, and that's what a friendship is. Not that you agree on the same thing. Although that's what I hear all the time. We're friends because we like the same thing. Then there are friends if you don't like the same thing, but they hang out with each other. They feel that need to be there in that community. Is that enough for the first hour and a half, roughly? Can we take a break now? Okay, I just wanted to give you two references to the problem of the failure of political economy. And this is really, I think, Žižek's best book. This is his first, The Sublime Object of Ideology, in which he systematically takes a look at, the failure of a Marxist approach, or even a Freudian psychoanalytic approach. One of the things that Freud had to learn is that the idea of the cure is not necessarily going to happen if a person realized the mechanism behind what he was doing, why he was doing what he was doing. Okay. And so it's a matter then of the person learning how to enjoy his symptom. Okay. Which is another book that Žižek wrote based on Lacan. This is based on Lacan as well. How many of you read this book? Okay. It's incredibly good. His examples to illustrate what he's talking about, there are two kinds. They are Eastern European jokes, political jokes, or they are scenes from Hitchcock films. And it just, I remember reading that book thinking, I'll never be able to write this way. This stuff is just incredible. Okay. But he cranks out a book now about every 6 months. This is the best. Let me just say that. And then Sloterdijk, Sloterdijk, the critique of cynical reason. Critique of cynical reason. And it follows Žižek. Žižek was first to talk about this, but it was in the air at the time. There are other books and other articles, okay, but these are the two big ones. This right here is this is a powerful book in terms of his using those kinds of examples and the insight that they give readers. And this is not only offers a critique, but maybe a solution, where he talks about cynicism, the cynics. Diogenes or Sina as being a kind of engaging in one performative after another to undercut cynical reason. So, but you need to read these books because they will give you some powerful sense of what is going wrong in thinking, especially in the Western continent. And read the novels of Milan Kundera. In his critique, one of them is called The Joke. Another is the book of Laughter and Forgetting. Terry Eagleton asks a question about Marxism.
I'm not against Marxism, okay? I mean, it's there, it's like all the other isms. We all learn from all of these things, okay? So I'm not anti that. Anyone who's anti anything is always within the very horizon of the thing that he doesn't want to be, or she doesn't want to be associated with very much. It's like hating someone so much that you become their emotional slave. So it's these sorts of investments, okay, that you have to really stop and think about. There are lots of things going on, and it's not just about the other person, okay? Their relationships. Anyway, read these up here. The critique of cynical reason is like that. The bottom line then is, I wrote a piece on this, I haven't published it, I delivered it, and people really got pissed off. People in cultural studies and cultural critique and so on. They were stalking me at the conference. And I was down, in the basement where the book exhibit is, And people would dart up and say, "You just like to piss people off, don't you?" And then dart off. I thought, wow, wonderful conversation. But it was that kind of, it was weird. So you had generation after generation after generation of students, let's say in college, first, undergraduate, studying cultural studies. And all that I asked for was a longitudinal study. I was giving them the ability to crunch, numbers, okay? And asked them to try to follow these people to see, in fact, if they did change their behavior and stop acting against their own best interests, okay? And started acting for in their own best interests, to find out whether or not they had become cynical. And it basically what the argument is by both of these people is these people become cynical. What does that mean? They know it's wrong and they do it anyway. That's what the good nuns used to say. You have to know it's a sin, and if you know it's a sin and you do it anyway, you have sinned. So there's sort of a resonance there between sinning and cynical. And the realization, as I said, is devastating. Do you have any questions or things you want to say about it at this point in time? What I want to do is to move and take a look at the table of contents, and then we'll get into the book. But where are you now? Is there something that you're pissed off about that you have to express? Or something that you are in a state of joy, having a mediocre non-response, or whatever? The full array of possibilities. I guess I'll have to work harder to provoke you. Do you want to say something?
Okay.
No, I'm not asking
no,
you.
well,
You look like you were...
I was thinking it's not really actually anything particular, just that in First is Tragedy, Then is Farce, Žižek really does, I think, a lovely job of exploring more nuances and resonances and different ways of being cynical, and different structures of the je sais bien et comment fetish that I know very well, all the same. I was just thinking about that and then hesitating about saying it because it seemed like,
What are the different ways of enjoying your symptom? So, And so all of that is cynical. But it's not just cynical anymore. What has he done with it? Well, we have found ourselves in the city called cynical. And in a sense, he's sort of doing the Kinnick thing here. He's trying a little bit doing Diogenes of Sino. I mean, I've seen him do. Do you know who Diogenes of Sino is? He was a character. Stories are that, whether they're true or not, that while Socrates is in the Agora talking about the soul, the ideal forms in the soul, Sinope is sort of adjacent to it and masturbating and talking about the body. So, because there's not that much talk about the body by Plato. Okay, it's ideal forms. It's let's get out of here. Okay. Whereas Diogenes is Sino, and look at the last name, Sino, yes, no. He was a character. And he went around looking for, what was it, the honest man with a lantern during the day? You know. So it was performative comments, okay, instead of dialectics. Table of contents. Do you spend time looking at tables of contents, see what you can make of them? The impossible consensus. Sensus communis is not possible. I mean, it's possible, but it's not. You can force people to try to all agree to each other under a common figure. Okay. The three pragmatic positions. What does pragmatics mean here? Thousand Plateau opens up with a discussion of pragmatics. It's usually associated with linguistics. Gosh, you're not talking. A general literature. Let's say you haven't read the book. A casuistry of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
The right to lie. Casuistry is the right to lie. Think of Nietzsche's lying in an extra-moral sense. Have you read that briefly, please? It's very, very powerful. I mean, look, he writes his genealogy. You see, his ethics book, Nietzsche's ethics book, is a genealogy of morals. And what is the alibi for morality? Or let's say ethics. To find fault with people and beat the hell out of them. Basically. That's the alibi of morality. To be able to do that under the cover of you're doing wrong. Now you take punishment. That's an oversimplification, but basically. And so once you see that, then you have to do what? Rethink the notion of morality. Okay. And in terms of ethics, in ethos is mentioned in the book, in ethia. Ethos is considered to be the domestication of the wild person. We're all wild. We poop in our pants when we're born. We're in the imaginary, let's say, and that's got to die. We have to die and fall into the symbol. The parallel there is we have to be domesticated. Before we are domesticated and have this ethos, there is a wildness in us. It's called ethia, E-T-H-E-A, which also is a plural form of ethos. That ethia is the wildness in it. The example that is normally given comes from Homer. And Homer talks about the wild horses. And then they're captured and domesticated so humans can use them. So they're expressing their ethia in their wildness. And they take on an ethos. And then they have a habitus, H-A-B-I-T-U-S. A habit, but a habitus. That's where they live. They have a place where they live. Okay? And it's the place where they also go to die. So ethos, ethia, and habitus. And then there's knownness, two meanings of knownness. We won't go into all that. But it's basically, one meaning is the law, okay? The custom that is followed by a particular group. And another meaning is that it's a pasture, right? Set aside, where people can go speak and say whatever they want to say. It's free speech area, like in front of libraries. It always amuses me that universities have free speech places in front of the library. What about the seminar rooms, What about the classroom, The dining room, you can't. Politics, the casuistry of the imagination, it is not only a reference to Nietzsche and lying in the extra-moral sense. He opens up the sense. Truth is a mobile army of metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche and irony. It's a bunch of tropes. Bunch of tropes. You know, not right, not reason, okay, not syllogisms and so on. What does Joyce, he mentions James Joyce, in it. What does he refer to as the syllogism? How does he spell it?
In Finnegan's Wake? Have you looked at, no one reads Finnegan's Wake. Have you looked at Finnegan's Wake before the novel?
Yeah.
That's how he spells the syllogism. There is also Oscar Wilde, have I talked about these earlier? The decay of crying, being able to tell a good lie. You know, really, you sit down and you have a conversation with someone and someone asks something about something, you say, well, you know, because it's dull. The answer is dull. And so what I'll usually do, you know, to keep things interesting for at least me, is do you want the truth, which is incredibly dull, or do you want an interesting story? You know, usually they want the interesting story. People want an interesting story. So you have a dull day, and someone said, well, how was your day? And then you tell them a whopper. You know, oh, man, let me tell you. Casuistry was also associated with the Jesuits. With the Jesuits who would change things, okay, to suit their own situations. So you get something called casuistic stretching, and that comes from Kenneth Burke, Attitudes Towards History, I think, in which he talks about you take the so-called original and you change it. Okay. We're always going to change it anyway, unless we just quote somebody. But the context, you know, this statement, begging the question that this is an original statement. Okay. But you change it. It's like a traveling theory, you know. You read somebody's theory and you change it a little bit to fit what you want to talk about. Okay. And that's a norm. Yeah.
I was curious how you feel about that with Burke, because for Burke it snaps back, right? You can change it so far, and the more you change it, you end up at a point of alienation where it snaps back. Where like you've stretched it, it's a rubber band, it either breaks and you find yourself in a new situation, or it pulls back to the original situation. You can only go so far with it. Which to me is somewhat opposed to Nietzsche's mobile army of metaphors, in the sense that for Burke, the casuistic stretching is always tethered somewhere.
Well, like everything else, no matter how you stretch it, it can come back around and bite you in the ass, right? And backfire, misfire on you, right? So, but you know, look, he's working out of the paradox of substance. So in all those stance words, you have a mixture of the Eucharist, the blood and body of Christ, the Eucharist, and feces. They're all in the same general category of stance words. And so then he goes on to talk about making peace, you know, keeping the Eucharist in mind, making peace with our feces. And so our body and our soul, so to speak. Those are some of the, I mean, he'll say outlandish things, you know, and he will say them because he never really had any, he's an autodidact, or was, okay, but he lives on. He never, you know, he just read on his own and hung out. He had a great gig in the village, you know, in New York. So. And then there's the big person, Wallace Stevens, okay? And it's this book, you can really understand what's going on in this book if you understand Wallace Stevens' idea of the supreme fiction. He's a poet, right? Have you read Stevens? Okay, he has a poem entitled, I think it's the idea of the supreme fiction. And he puts forth his 3 principles. It's called principles of the supreme fiction. When you put forth a truth, or it's a fiction, okay? When you put
for the truth, it has to be abstract. So it's malleable, and you know, you can use it in many different situations. It has got to give pleasure, and it has got to change. It has to be abstract. It's got to give pleasure. It has to change. So that truth has to change. That's the notion of what he refers to as the supreme figure. And there are a lot of people who thought, you know, Ralph Waldo Emerson saw along these lines. He talks about great thinkers, you know, who would come up with an image or a vision of something, and then it would last for X number of decades. And it gave order and value and meaning to our lives within a certain community. And then it wouldn't hold up anymore. So someone else had to come and give another vision. So this is basically what he's talking about here in terms of prescription. That as soon as you try to derive from prescription the one truth and all the others are not, you're in trouble at that point. Okay? There will always be some rebellion against it, always be some, let's say, a revolution if it's political, and so on. There will be people who will die to change it. Turn to page 2, the dedication, the epigram that it begins with. This is from the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle. The rule of the undetermined is itself undetermined. That's, in a nutshell, everything in the book. It's undetermination all the way down. The whole idea of a ground to stand on, a philosophical ground, a grund, is raised by Locke, picked up by so many other people. We don't talk about grund or ground that much anymore, other than we're talking historically. We talk about abgrund, okay, which is translated in many different ways, like abyss. And there's nothing to build a philosophy. There's no ground there anymore that you can count. Because grounding has gone through so many different groundings. So the rule of the undetermined, this is without any ground whatsoever, is itself undetermined. So that's our starting point. And so the first day is the impossible consensus. What does he mean? Have you read this? Have you had a chance to read it? And what is the object that they're trying to reach some sort of consensus about? This book, Libidinal Economy. You are saying about my libidinal economy that its mode of writing is such as to make it a take it or leave it proposition? I will answer, you take it or leave it. But if you leave it, it means that it has produced no effects. What does it mean to produce effects? Lyotard says, I was saying that the form of writing did not allow for any negotiating. That is, you couldn't argue about any of this stuff. It's just there. Either you take it or leave it. But what's the effect then? What's the difference between talking and giving information and exposition and arguments and saying something for effect? What's the difference between them? Certain speakers will do both. Some will just throw out stuff and it's just a series of effects. But they don't go away. I wonder if any book is ever negotiable. This is Lyotard. In any case, I think books produce effects. Those that pretend to negotiate are somewhat naive. I mean, they're at odds right away. What does effects mean here? In the context of this book, effects means that the speaker is not putting forth constatives. Truth statement. You can see the stasis there. Do you know anything about stasis? I'm sorry, you can get into endless number of explanations or excursies or whatever here, but I have to ethically stop and ask, do you know anything about stasis theory? It's how you set up an argument. Okay? Often, first of all, what you've got to do is that you have to both understand each other. Okay. Often people disagree at cross purposes. You know, they're talking about two different things. Okay? Which can be really productive. Okay, but sometimes not. It's often counterproductive. So you've got to find a place where you can both stand. Okay? And that allows you to agree to disagree. So stasis theory is a systematic way, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, of being able to make constatives, yes or no, we agree, we don't agree on a particular proposition. Okay. So this book produces effects, not constatives. That truth statement that we could then argue about. Have you had a chance to get into the book, Libidinal Economy? Or are you going to stay up all night tonight and read it? There are no arguments, not really. It's just this crud stuff. Images, reference allusions, talk about somebody's body, their face, it just moves. You know. It's like being in a maze of sorts. And he's very, and he'll stop and give an exposition. You know, telling you precisely what he is doing there. Okay. So that the reader can, you know, get some sense of how he wants. Good writers will tell us how they want to be read, okay. Especially if it's not the norm, and they're not writing following the norm. And sometimes they can put it in the preface, and or put it in the text. Stop. You know, you probably don't understand what in the world it is that I've said here, but let me give you the conditions for maybe understanding what I'm talking about. Okay. But the understanding is not from a point to argue, because either you accept what I'm saying or you don't accept what I'm saying. Now, why would a person be so perverse? Why is it a lot of writers are so perverse? Or is that the right word? Because to say that they're perverse means that they're denying something that we have a consensus about. But this starts out with the impossible consensus. How do you get across the notion that political economy fails? Okay, you can just point to things. Okay, you could do that kind of thing. And how do you talk about a libidinal economy? You have an opportunity here to talk about it in terms of constatives. But anyone can, you know, reason. But anyone can come back and say that's a performative contradiction. That's what Habermas would say. Okay. So what you do is you perform out of a libidinal economy, like Marx performs out of a political economy, but what happens to him? He can't stay there, and he gets caught up in all of this passion and desire that he's getting more out of finding this evidence, and rather than giving it to people to go use it for liberation. He's caught up in just writing one volume after another volume after another volume, and writing all kinds of contradictions. I mean, Marx is filled with contradictions. And I'm not offering that as a criticism. Everyone is. Okay. If you're a writer, and anal retentive, and crossing out everything that just doesn't fit and writing something that's incredibly dull. But it's not that he's contradicting himself. He's thinking different sides. Will the revolution be brought about by human beings making history, or is it just in matter, and it's going to happen eventually? He's playing both sides of the street, in the alley as well, trying to think out loud instead of Writing all this and saying, okay, now I have all these ideas here, now I'm going to get rid of all the stuff that contradicts and I'll do this. That's dull. I want to see where he's been. Okay. That would be a way of writing, which a lot of people don't like. Just give me the results. So I can agree with you. If both parties, author and reader, are neutralized, you can't negotiate, okay, then one can say, let's talk. But your entire book has been written in such a way as to exclude this possibility. This is why I have been thinking that it would be very difficult to have a conversation with the author of that book. This is Tybalt speaking, right? Now, let me ask you a question. Did this dialogue really take place? I mean, there is a person, Tybalt, okay, tells me right back here, right? Doesn't it tell me here?
Yeah, he was the editor of L'Esprit.
L'Esprit, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, and so I thought, well, maybe Lyotard wrote this whole thing. So I went out and discovered that Tybalt, has an article he's explaining that this interview, that he was a part of, but he really doesn't say much, does he? It's as if the words are the very words Lyotard's got to put in the mouth of Tybalt to be able to say what he wants to say. There is a parallel. Okay, where am I going with this? There is a parallel between this dialogue and the Socratic dialogue called the Sophist. And there are clues in here to that. And it so happens that Lyotard did write an article about that dialogue, which starts this way. There's this person called the stranger. Does the word stranger pop up in an endnote in here? Between vous and tu? Mm-hmm. The stranger. It could be the Eleatic stranger, but this is just the stranger. And he's stopped by Socrates' students or whatever. And there's this talk about having a conversation about whatever, okay? And he says, in the give and the take, the dialogue, the Socratic dialogue. And he says, no, I just want to talk. Well, but you can't do that because that's not a philosophical way of doing things. Well, I will talk if the person I'm talking with will say what I want him to say. Give the right answer so I can get on with what I have to say. Now, why in the world would Plato write such a thing? And then he gets into some serious shit, about ideal forms. He's knocking the sophists and so on. But why would he open up a dialogue to undercut everything that he is saying? Oh, well, maybe something was attached to it at the beginning. Someone who didn't like Plato and had the text and wrote that up front. What? You're open, okay, on something. We can't know. But let's say, as if, that Plato wrote that dialogue. Why is he undercutting everything else that follows? Why isn't he using Socrates? In the Gorgias, he's making fun of himself. Plato is himself. There are three people that Socrates talks with. Finally, talks with Gorgias, and he tells Socrates tells Gorgias, just answer yes or no. It's like our courtroom, where yes or no will not work that easily. And Gorgias says yes, all the way through. And then Socrates just sort of laughs about it and says, well, you're being a really good interlocutor, So there's this self-consciousness that's in there. Why is that going on in those Platonic dialogues? And you find it elsewhere.
I think it undercuts the sophist, because the sophist has the ability to argue both sides, but they choose whichever one profits them. So by arguing both sides against each other, you're showing that either side can be argued.
Mm-hmm.
And the sophist is someone who chooses a side specifically for their own purpose.
Well, there are people who do that, and we call them sophists. Christ, who died on the cross, he was called a sophist. Socrates was called a sophist, and so on. So the word is meaningless. That's the problem with the word. But there are people who will tell lies for their own profit. That's true. But we're talking about lying in an extra moral sense. Okay? And seeing both sides. We can't presume that our side is correct. We have to look at both sides. I don't know how many times I've seen people and myself arguing with somebody else, not letting them talk, and all of a sudden, in my arguing, out comes the argument against my position. You know, there's that kind of thing going on, and it's like, oh my God, I need to rethink everything here. How did I undo myself? Because I had so much invested in what I thought was the truth of the matter. Okay? And so if that can happen once, it can happen twice, it can happen 3 times, 4 times, in relation to the same issue. Okay? But my question is, why would Plato, there are lots of these questions that are out there. He was totally against writing, but he wrote. So you have to live with these. And there were good reasons for both, okay? But why would he start a dialogue in that fashion? Why is it being started in that fashion here? I mean, this is like part 2 of that dialogue on the Sophist by Plato. That's how I can read it, okay? And make it extra valuable. Because he's arguing for the sophistic position here, sophistry. And the position that he's working from is from Gorgias. Who will pop up here in the Lyotard. He pops up in the different. This has been read, this is a trilemma, okay? The texts that we have are from Aristotle, okay, and from a number of other people. And it's a 3-level proposition. Nothing exists. This has been read as a parody of who? Parmenides on being. Which is like, he's like, but you're going to get the Parmenian game in here. When there's talk about the three pragmatics, there is the Parmenian game, the game of the truth. There is the Moses game, the game of obligation. Okay, and then there is the pagans game, okay, which is the one that Lyotard's going with. The pagan game is the game played without any criteria whatsoever. You don't talk about identity, non-contradiction, exclude third. And you make up the rules as you go along. Because the rules have to constantly change since everything around you is constantly changing. It's never in stasis, it's always changing. That's why you can never really arrive at a particular truth. The truth is untruth. So when Heidegger goes and rereads the Parmenides on being, he reads it literally, the Greek literally, whereas aletheia was translated as truth. It's stupid. He translates it literally as unconcealed. And you get a completely different Parmenides. Do you see what happens? You get these texts and you get this interpretation. And for centuries, people talk about Plato as being this kind of person, fixed, you know, and so much so that it's no longer Plato. That's what I meant about, is Plato a Platonist? Okay. And that poem by Parmenides, you know, is read totally in a different way. Well, you can explain this as a negative deconstruction, just turning the reading around. Okay. And that would go on to what's the phrase? Non-positive affirmation. You can say yes, no, non-positive affirmation. Where you open up a 3rd one, a 4th one, a 5th one, a 6th reading, and so on. And then you can, there's always going to be someone who's going to say, but which one is true? And it's like, which one's going to be on the test? So it's very hard to teach people this because people want, they see, especially as kids, they want to know what the rules are, okay? For a variety of reasons. So they know what rules to break, you know, so on. But nothing exists
This is an ontological statement. Is this a parody? No, I don't think so. Because for it to be a parody, Parmenides' poem would have to be an original. But there are historians that say Parmenides thought thoughts that no one else had thought before. That's remarkable, isn't it? Well, they need a point of origin. To do what? To write this history of philosophy and how it progresses. So the historiography is fixed. Okay, so nothing exists. If something exists, it cannot be known. If it can be known, it cannot be communicated. No, I feel it. I got the truth in it, you know. Well, tell me about it. I can't. It's just in me. It's like when you're on drugs, okay? Not that I have ever been on drugs. I was a jazz musician and never had a drug, okay? But you sit around saying, I've got the truth, and you just sit there with somebody else who's got the drug, and you're both talking about the truth. You know, you've had like a dozen cups of coffee, you're in a coffee house, and you're doing this, and you know, and the waiter comes by to give you more coffee and is listening to you going like crazy, and walking off the shelf, his or her head. Okay, this is an ontological statement. Nothing exists. This is an epistemological statement. If something exists, it cannot be known. And this is a communication, rhetorical statement, and it can't be communicated. And when Lyotard is asked by Tipple, where do you get this idea of paganism? What does he say? He answers 3 times at different points. What does he say? It's a turn on nothing. I get it from nothing. Now, let me ask you something. What does nothing mean? Is it totally negative? I mean, we have given a name for something that doesn't exist. Nothing could be everything that was excluded as nothing. In order to make meaning, you have to get rid of things that are challenged to meaning. And so you exclude all these thirds and throw them out here. But what do they, in a sense, constitute? Nothing. And out of that nothing, you can make, you have compossibility. You can make an incredible number of worlds. Narratives, non-narratives, whatever you wish. And so the fall of philosophy was a fortunate fall. Yes?
I was just wondering, is this nothing that has to do anything with the silence that speaks in language, the silence that is the different?
The silence? Yes, it can be. About which we cannot speak, we must remain silent. You know, the 7th proposition put forth by Wittgenstein. Okay. There are many stories about why he wrote that document, trying to please some people or show that he could do that kind of stupid thinking. When I use the word stupid, I mean it in a very positive sense. Hey, another book by Avatar Renell you might want to read. She's my mentor. Okay. You might want to read is Stupidity. It's an incredibly beautiful book. But so what Lyotard does at the beginning of the differend is he says silence is a phrase, Reggie. There's something being said.
Yeah.
During silence. Oh my God, so much more.
Yeah. It's like nothing. Nothing is not nothing. Nothing is something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a possible condition of possibility
Yes.
for an event.
Yeah. So there's a basic turnaround there in thinking, where you think you've got, oh my God, we're total skepticism. No, you just had more to believe in.
Okay, I wonder if you'd say a little bit more with Gorgias about the third term, because it seems to me that when you say nothing exists and you say that's ontology, hardly anyone would argue with you. when you say that's ontology. And when you say if something exists, it cannot be known, you say that's epistemology. Again, hardly anyone would argue with you and say, no, that's something else, it's not epistemology. But when you say if it can be known, it cannot be communicated.
They're not parallel. That's not parallel with the other two.
Yeah, it's not.
It's odd.
It could be ethics, it could be politics, it could be a lot of things besides communication or rhetoric. And I wonder if, I don't know if you just want to elaborate on the many things that...
Okay, let me give you a parallel example. The three major speech acts in Aristotle's Rhetoric. Deliberative discourse about the future. Judicial forensic discourse about the past. And then epideictic discourse, which is praise or blame, but usually praise. And where is that? They say the present. But that third one is odd. When you get to thirds, they're usually odd. Okay? I mean, they're hermaphroditic almost. Third figures are really odd. But there seems to be incredible advantage, life-enhancing advantages at the level of thirds. Why would there only be one sex? Why would one presume that? And where did the idea of one come from? It's not Greek. I mean, every classicist I know says it's not Greek. It's the Tao. It's Asian. And don't forget, there's all of this trading going back and forth, not only of spices and so on and noodles, but stories, anecdotes, people talk. And so Heraclitus got this idea of the one. Parmenides got the idea of the one. And then Badu gets rid of it. It's too problematic. And he takes up situations. And that's a prescriptive situation. And in his rewrite of Heidegger's Being and Time, he wouldn't like my saying that. I enjoy saying it. He uses, he favors mathematics, and he says it in writing, that dialogue, the sophist. The ideal forms, okay? But when he's cut the one off, okay, completely, as a possibility, total unification, then what he's doing is he's creating all the other possible situations in set theory, mathematics.